Imagine working flawlessly for years, only to be cast aside in a
I
single
I
moment.
fire you.
A cold CEO fires his perfect secretary over one small mistake. But just as she walks out, something happens that no one in the office could have predicted. The man who seemed untouchable crumbles before her eyes, revealing a hidden truth that shakes everything she thought she knew about. Why was she the one he called in his most desperate hour? What secret was he hiding that made her the target of unseen enemies? Stay tuned, because this story will take you from heartbreak to shocking revelation, and nothing is as it seems. Asterisk. Cold CEO fires his perfect secretary over one mistake. What happens next will shock youth. Office was silent, except for the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. The secretary stood frozen, her hands trembling slightly as the weight of her mistake pressed down on her. A single file lay on the desk in front of the CEO. His eyes were cold, sharp like ice, staring at her as though she were nothing more than a broken tool. "You had one job," he said, his voice calm but heavy with finality. Her heart pounded inside her chest, each beat echoing louder than the clock's tick. The walls of the office seemed to close in on her, the polished glass windows reflecting her pale face back at her. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry, words stuck like stones. The CEO leaned back in his chair, his silence more terrifying than his anger. Finally he stood, his tall frame casting a shadow over her. "You are fired," he said, each word slow, deliberate, and merciless. The air felt colder as the words sank in, slicing through her like a knife, her vision blurred. But she refused to let her tears fall. She picked up her bag with trembling hands, the leather strap rough against her skin as she walked to the door. Her knees threatened to give way beneath her. She reached for the handle, her palm sweaty against the cool metal. But just as she pulled the door open, a sound erupted from behind her, a sound that froze her in place. The CEO's chair had fallen over. Crashing onto the polished floor, his voice followed, sharp and panicked, unlike the controlled tone he always carried. "Wait," he shouted. But his voice broke halfway through. She turned, her breath caught in her throat. The man who had always appeared untouchable now clutched his chest, his face drained of all color, his eyes locked onto hers, wide with desperation. For the first time, the powerful CEO looked human. Asterisk, she stood frozen, her bag slipping from her shoulder and thudding against the floor. The CEO's breaths came in short, ragged bursts, his hand gripping at the front of his suit as though trying to tear the pain away. The mighty figure who once towered above her now stumbled, his knees buckling against the sharp edge of the desk, papers scattered like frightened birds. Sliding across the polished surface and falling silently to the carpet, her pulse raced, louder than the storm inside the glass walls of the office. For a moment, she wanted to run, to let him fall the way he had just cast her aside, but her legs moved on their own. She rushed forward, kneeling beside him, the scent of expensive cologne mixing with the metallic sting of fear in the air. His eyes were wide, pleading, filled with something she had never seen before: vulnerability. His lips trembled as he tried to speak, but no words came out, only a faint gasp that made her skin prickle. "Help me," he finally whispered, the sound raw and broken. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, the glow of the screen blinding in the dim light of the office. The silence of the empty floor made every second stretch endlessly, each ring of the emergency number echoing in her ears like a siren. The man who had fired her without mercy was now completely at her mercy, and in that moment, the power shifted. Asterisk, the phone pressed against her ear felt heavy, as though the entire moment weighed upon her shoulders. The operator's voice was calm, steady, asking for details she could barely form. Her own voice cracked, trembling, yet she forced the words out: his name, his condition, the address. The CEO's body slumped against her arm, his expensive suit brushing against her skin. Cold with sweat, she could feel the frantic beat of his heart, fast but weakening with every passing second. The office lights above flickered, their hum filling the silence between his shallow breaths. His grip found her wrist, weak but desperate, holding her as if she were the only anchor left in his collapsing world. The sight of him once so untouchable, so commanding, reduced to a man fighting for breath, twisted her chest with something she did not expect. Not pity, not anger, but something darker. His eyes searched hers, wide and panicked as if begging her to stay. The seconds dragged on. The faint wail of sirens still too far away to reach them. Her mind raced with the memory of his cold words, "You are fired." The echo of that cruelty clashed with the sight of him now, helpless and at her mercy. Her phone slipped from her hand onto the carpet, and as she looked down at him, trembling in her arms, a thought formed, sharp, terrifying, and impossible to ignore. What if help never came in time? Asterisk, her breath came in shallow bursts, her chest tightening with every second that ticked away. The sirens were still distant, muffled by the city outside, as if mocking the urgency of the moment. The CEO's hand clung to her wrist, his nails pressing lightly into her skin, his strength fading with each desperate squeeze. His lips moved soundlessly, a faint tremor of words that never quite escaped. She leaned closer, the faint scent of his cologne now mixed with salt and fear. "Do not leave me," he finally whispered, his voice barely more than air. Her throat burned, torn between rage and an unexpected pull of sympathy. The office felt colder, shadows stretching long against the floor as the evening light dimmed. Behind the glass walls, her mind replayed the moment he fired her, his eyes empty, his tone merciless, treating her as though she were disposable. Yet here he was, fragile and breakable, clinging to her as though she were his last chance at survival. The silence pressed in, suffocating, broken only by his rattling breaths. Her fingers brushed over his hand, trembling, not sure if it was to comfort him or to test just how weak his grip had become. The sound of sirens grew louder, swelling through the night air. Blue and red lights flickered against the glass walls, painting the office in harsh colors of urgency. Her heart pounded as footsteps thundered down the corridor. Closer, closer. The door burst open. Paramedics rushed in, their voices sharp, their movements fast, pulling him from her arms. For a moment she stayed on the floor, her body heavy, her hands numb. One of the paramedics glanced back at her, eyes filled with unspoken questions, but she could not move, could not speak. As they lifted him onto the stretcher, his gaze found hers once more, not cold, not commanding, but pleading. And in that instant, she realized the man who thought he had all the power was now bound to her in a way neither of them could escape. Asterisk. The stretcher wheeled out of the office, the echo of rushing footsteps fading down the corridor. She remained seated on the cold carpet, her body refusing to follow. The room felt hollow without him, the ticking clock louder than ever, each second digging into her skin. Her palms were damp, still tingling where his weak grip had clung to her. The memory of his eyes pleading, vulnerable, burned in her mind, refusing to let her breathe. At last, she stood, her knees unsteady, and followed the trail of voices down to the lobby. The glass doors slid open, the night air sharp against her face, flashing. Lights painted the street in violent shades of red and blue. The crowd outside parted as the paramedics pushed the stretcher into the ambulance. She saw him one last time before the doors closed. His hand twitched, as though searching for hers even in his fading strength. And then he was gone, swallowed by the siren's wail as the ambulance tore into the darkness. She stood alone on the sidewalk, the city rushing past her as though nothing had happened. Her bag felt heavier now, the strap digging into her shoulder, reminding her of the words that had cut so deep only minutes ago. "You are fired," but those words no longer sounded final. They sounded like the beginning of something else, something she could not yet name. She stood at the edge of the street long after the ambulance had vanished, the wail of its siren still echoing in her ears, the city lights blurred, her vision stinging. Though she refused to let the tears fall, her legs moved on their own, carrying her away from the building where her life had just collapsed and twisted in a single night. Every step felt heavy. As if invisible chains dragged behind her, she found herself sitting at a bus stop. The cold metal bench pressing against her back, her bag clutched tightly in her lap. People walked by without a glance, their voices blending into a low murmur that felt far away. Her mind replayed the sight of Himtha, the powerful man crumbling in her arms. His whisper raw with fear, "Do not leave me." The words would not leave her. Echoing louder than the roar of traffic, louder than her own heartbeat. For the first time, she wondered who he truly was beneath the ice and cruelty. The bus arrived, its doors hissing open, but she could not bring herself to move. She sat there in the wash of headlights until the bus pulled away without her. Leaving silence in its wake, her phone buzzed suddenly. The vibration sharp against her palm, a number she did not recognize. With hesitant fingers, she answered. The voice on the other end was urgent, breathless. "This is St. George's Hospital. You were listed as his emergency contact. We need you here immediately." Her heart stopped. She had never given his name for anything beyond work. Why was she the one they called? Her hand trembled as the weight of the moment settled on her. The cold CEO had no one else. Asterisk. Her breath caught in her throat as the words from the hospital echoed in her. Ear emergency contact. She lowered the phone slowly, staring at the glowing screen as if it might explain what she had just heard. The city's noise dulled around her, swallowed by the pounding of her own heart. Her legs moved stiffly, carrying her toward the waiting line of taxis. The driver barely looked at her as she gave the hospital's name, her voice breaking on the last word. The ride blurred past in streaks of neon and shadow, each light flickering like fragments of memory, his face pale against the office floor, his hand clinging to hers, the whisper that refused to let go of her mind. When the taxi stopped, she almost did not notice until the driver cleared his throat. The hospital loomed above her, its sterile lights glowing against the night sky, cold and unwelcoming. Inside, the sharp scent of antiseptic hit her, burning her nose. Dragging her further into the reality she wished to escape, a nurse at the desk looked up immediately, as if she had been expected. "Are you Miss Claire?" the nurse asked softly. She nodded. Though her lips felt numb, the nurse lowered her eyes, her tone careful, almost hesitant. "He asked for you." Claire's chest tightened. Her body locked in place, unable to take the next step. The cold CEO, feared by many, hated by most, had no family waiting, no friends pacing the halls, only her asterisk. Her shoes clicked softly against the polished floor as the nurse led her down a narrow corridor. The walls were pale, washed in sterile light, their emptiness pressing in on her. Every step echoed with a weight she could not shake. At last, the nurse stopped at a door and pushed it open gently. The room was dim, the steady beeping of a monitor breaking the silence. He lay in the bed, pale against the white sheets, his chest rising and falling with shallow effort. Wires and tubes ran from his body, connecting him to the machines that kept him tethered to life. For a moment, she could not move. The man who had once towered over her in power and authority now looked small, almost fragile. His eyes fluttered open, searching, unfocused until they found her. A weak smile touched his lips, a ghost of the arrogance he once carried. "You came," he whispered, his voice hoarse. She swallowed hard, her throat aching with unspoken words. He lifted a trembling hand, gesturing for her to come closer. Her feet carried her to the side of the bed, her fingers curling tightly around her bag strap, as though it were her only anchor. His hand brushed hers, colder than she remembered, fragile like glass. "There is something you need to know," he breathed, each word costing him strength. Her pulse quickened, dread and curiosity colliding inside her. His eyes held hers, raw, with something she had never seen before, fear and confession. "I fired you because I wanted to protect you." Asterisk, her lips parted, but no sound came. The words struck her harder than the moment he had dismissed her in his office. Protect her? Her chest tightened as his grip on her hand grew weaker. his breathing shallow, uneven. She leaned closer, the faint hum of the machines amplifying the silence between them. His eyes flickered with urgency, as though time itself was slipping from him. "There are people," he whispered, his voice breaking into a rasp. "People who want what I have. They will use anyone close to me, even you." Her heart pounded, each syllable crawling under her skin. The image of his cold dismissal shifted in her mind, replaced by a shadow she had never noticed behind his actions. His lips trembled, forcing out more words. "I thought if I pushed you away, they would not see you?" His chest hitched, the monitor beeping in uneven bursts. She pressed her free hand over his, her voice barely more than a breath. Who are they?" But his eyes rolled back, his hand slipping slightly from her grasp. The machines shrieked in sudden alarm, piercing the air with sharp, merciless cries. Doctors and nurses rushed in, their voices urgent, their bodies moving around her. Pushing her back toward the wall, she stood frozen, her heart lodged in her throat, her ears ringing with the machine's relentless sound. The man who had once controlled everything was now dangling at the edge of silence, and his unfinished confession burned inside her like fire. Asterisk. She clutched her chest as the doctors surrounded him, their urgent voices blurring into a single frantic hum, her eyes locked on the rise and fall of his chest, shallow and erratic, fighting against the pull of stillness. The monitor screamed, a jagged line flashing in angry bursts and dipping low as though life itself were slipping through his grasp. A nurse guided her back, but her feet felt cemented to the floor. She could not leave. Not now. One doctor pressed against his chest, each thrust sharp and desperate. Another adjusted wires, barked instructions, their movements frantic yet precise. Claire's nails dug into her palms, the pain the only thing keeping her upright. Her mind repeated his words in a loop that refused to break. "There are people. They will use anyone close to me, even you." The monitor suddenly steadied, a faint rhythm crawling back, weak but present. Gasps of relief swept the room as the doctors pulled back. Still hovering, still watchful. He was alive. Barely. Claire's knees weakened, relief and dread colliding until she thought she might collapse. A doctor turned to her, eyes narrowed with curiosity. "Are you family?" he asked. The word struck her like ice. She opened her mouth, but no answer came, because she was not family, yet she was here, and he had asked for her. Her silence was enough for the doctor to nod, his voice softening. "He is stable for now. But if he has something to say, you need to hear it soon." Her gaze returned to the bed, to the fragile figure swallowed by white sheets and wires. She knew he would not rest until the truth was spoken, but she also knew whatever secret he carried was already pulling her into a storm she could not escape. Asterisk. Claire stood rooted to the spot, the doctor's words circling in her mind like vultures. If he has something to say, you need to hear it soon. Her eyes lingered on the pale figure in the bed, his breaths shallow, his body tethered to machines that hummed in mechanical rhythm. The man who once seemed invincible now lay like glass, fragile, breakable, and frighteningly human. She lowered herself into the chair beside him, the metal frame cold against her skin. The hospital room was quiet now, too quiet, every tick of the clock louder than her own heartbeat. For a moment, she wondered if she should stay or walk away. He had fired her, humiliated her, treated her as though she were nothing. Yet in the end, it was her name on the emergency contact form. Her, and no one else. The weight of that truth pressed down on her chest until breathing felt like a burden. She closed her eyes. But the silence cracked when she heard movement. A faint groan escaped his lips, his fingers twitching against the sheets. Her eyes flew open, slowly. His lids lifted and his gaze met hers, clouded but desperate. "Claire," he whispered, her name fractured by weakness. She leaned closer, her pulse racing. "They are already watching you." Her blood ran cold, her body rigid as the words sank in. A faint shadow moved in the hallway beyond the glass window of the room. Her breath caught, her instinct screaming that they were no longer alone. Asterisk, the shadow in the hallway lingered for a moment, then slipped away into the sterile silence of the hospital. Claire's breath trembled, her eyes darting back to the man on the bed. His grip tightened weakly on her wrist, his voice nothing more than a frayed thread of sound. Do not trust anyone. The words sank deep, leaving a chill that no warmth could erase. His eyes fluttered shut again, his body surrendering to exhaustion, machines steadying the rhythm of his fragile life. Claire sat frozen, her heart torn between fear and resolve. She rose slowly from the chair, her gaze sweeping the room one last time. The man who had fired her, belittled her, and broken her spirit, had also unveiled a truth she could not ignore. Outside, the night pressed against the hospital windows, vast and merciless. But alive with unanswered questions, Claire stepped into the corridor, the sound of her footsteps echoing softly, her shadow stretching long under the fluorescent lights. She was no longer just his.